Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu wa sallam ala khatamul anbiya'i wa mursaleen. Nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa barik wa sallam. My beloved brothers and sisters, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the continuation of our study on deeper roots. And this study is not just history for history's sake. This is not just information where you store up dates and names of people in your mind and places. But this is the concept of history, the concept that history is experiences, human experience. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has shown in the Quran itself that 1/3 of the Quran is qasas. They are literally stories, parables, the stories of creation, stories of the anbiya, the stories of the great ones. And so Allah Azza wa Jal tells us in Surah Yusuf, لَقَدْ كَانَ فِي قَصَصِهِمْ عِبْرَةٌ لِأُولِي الْأَلْبَابِ, that in their stories are lessons for those who would reflect. So this is the concept now that we are using in terms of a justification for studying history. And this is one of the areas in Islamic studies which has been neglected in the past 50 years or so. And students of knowledge are becoming more and more aware of the fact that without understanding the history, we don't have perspective. If we don't understand the past, then we cannot fully understand who we are or where we are today. And if you don't know who you are or where you are today, then you can't project in the future. So the past and the present and the future are connected together for us. They're connected together, and as the saying goes, there's nothing new under the sun. So what we are searching for is the ibrah. It is the lessons. So we study the history of those who came before us. We study the environment that we are in order to be able to practice Islam, in order to not fall into the pits and the mistakes of those who came before us. Also, history again gives us something of an identity. And this is part of the reason why we are teaching this course of Deeper Roots here in this society in North America. I'm teaching this subject with Al-Maghrib Institute, and I've taught this subject actually to somewhere around 5,000 students. And so this is a continuation of an ongoing study which is being done so that we can understand in the West that we are not foreigners. We are not new people off the boat, but we are part of this society, and right from early times, Muslims have actually contributed to the society and are contributing up until now in a positive way. And so this is the concept of deeper roots, that in the positive identity. Secondly, we learned last week that in order to truly understand history itself, we have to deconstruct or take apart the present history that is given to us. Because the present history, as we mentioned last week, is in the type of system that is called Eurocentrism. And that is when you center yourself in Europe. And so in Eurocentrism, for instance, Greenwich Mean Time that's how your times begin. And they will base the world upon Greenwich Mean Time. Why does it have to be based upon a little section of London called Greenwich? Why couldn't it be Beijing? Why couldn't it be Mecca? Why couldn't it be Casablanca in Morocco? Even if you look at Greenwich itself and go down south, you will see Jenne and Timbuktu in Mali are actually right on the same latitude. And so, but Eurocentrism centers you in Europe. So unconsciously, we have an inferiority complex. And we look toward the small island of England and the UK as the center of our understanding. We also look at the European countries as the developed countries, and the other countries are underdeveloped. They say the third world, which means that Africa, Asia, South America is the third world. You're third. Who was the first world? They say that that was Europe, Northern Europe. The second world is like Russia and the communist states. But the point is, if you look at this concept and then go to history, you find that it was the southern parts of the world, ancient Egypt, ancient Mesopotamia, Iraq, ancient India and China. These places were developed long before Europe. And civilization went south-north, not north-south. So we have to go through a psychological change, an intellectual change, to begin to orientate ourselves in order to go into our subject. Because the essence of the subject that I am bringing to you is how Muslims were actually in America long before Columbus, how we are part of the societies of the America, and what we have done over the years. But in order to even believe that somebody could be in America before Columbus, we have to reorientate our thinking. And so our centrism is not in Europe, it's not in China or India or Africa. We are what we could call Mecca-centric. We center ourselves with the prophets. We center ourselves with revelation, the last wahi, the last form of revelation given to the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. That's how we center ourselves. And if you go to the great books of Islamic history, Ibn Kathir, Al-Bidayah wa Nihaya, Ibn al-Athir, and you see Imam al-Tabari, and the great historians, that's how they center themselves. That's how Islamic history goes. And that's the kind of thinking that Muslims have to develop in order to get our footing straight as to who we are and which direction we are going in. So we deconstruct Eurocentrism. We reorientate ourselves to the way we are thinking. And then we begin to project. In the new orientation, we found out that after the demise of Isa alayhi salam, we believe he was raised. But after his time, what they call BC changing into AD, the Roman Empire was the most powerful empire in the Mediterranean and in the European area. But the Romans were involved heavily in oppression and exploitation and slavery. And so they were eventually destroyed. After the Roman Empire fell, the lights went out. And Europe was in a state of darkness, educational darkness, for the most part. And this is what they call the Dark Ages. From somewhere around 500 AD to the 16th century, 1500 AD or so. That's what they call the Dark Ages. But we recognize the fact that it wasn't dark for Muslims. It was the golden age of Islam. And it was during this period that our scholars, with the concept of Tawheed, unity not only in Aqidah, not only in the concept of belief, but unity in our concept of humanity, that we are all part of one race, the human race. And as the Prophet ﷺ left in his final sermon, that there's no fadl, there's no preference of the Arabs over the non-Arabs, nor vice versa. And there's no preference of white over black or black over white. Illa bit taqwa. It is only taqwa, piety and right action, the consciousness of Allah. That's what separates individuals. And so with this concept of the unity of humanity, and the third part is the unity of knowledge, that sacred knowledge and secular knowledge, as they say today, it's all the same. The only difference is the sacred knowledge we have comes in a purer form, and that is the wahi, that is revelation directly from Allah Azza wa Jal to the angel Jibreel alayhi salam. The secular knowledge is the science, and you have to test. You get a theory, and then you observe, you test, and then you correct it. It's the scientific method. and you keep improving it until you come closer to what we could call rules or qawa'id. These are scientific principles. And these principles allowed human beings to make progress. What goes up comes down. Water boils at a certain temperature. It freezes at a certain temperature. There are certain qawa'id. There are certain principles that are fixed. And so they base their science on these principles, and they build and build and build until now we are flying in airplanes and we are communicating with each other around the world. Similarly, in civilizations, there are principles. There are principles for the rise and fall of civilizations. And that's part of what we get out of our study. And this is what is driving Islamic historians today, to try to see how we rose and how we fell. What are the mistakes that we made so we don't make these mistakes over again? In this case, the deeper roots also helps us with our identity. And it brings out information which has been hidden away from the world. And we discussed last week that recently, the end of 2014, that the President Tayyip Erdogan of Turkey made an open statement, and he said that, Muslims discovered America long before Columbus. The world went crazy. How dare you say something like this? And so this is part of what you will be studying now. What is the actual proof of this? How can you prove this? It was a loaded statement that he said, or it's a powerful statement. He shook educational circles when he said that he defied their concepts. Because one of the concepts that we learned, or the, Holy Grail, the second Holy Grail of history, was the fact that Columbus discovered America in 1492. That was the next cutoff point in history. And you'll see how in your history books, before that is the Dark Ages, after 1492 is what they call Renaissance, the rebirth of education and science and Europe itself. It's from there that they became world powers. So it's a key point, right? So what we are doing is deconstructing this and showing that Columbus did not discover America. He was actually very late. He wasn't even the first European, because the Vikings were in America long before Columbus, right? And that's clear. We're in Canada. We even have ruins of the Viking settlements in Newfoundland. So he wasn't the first European. And it's an insult to the populations in the Americas to even say this. So we want to take a little look at the Americas. Some of you may be aware of this, but I think many of you may not be aware of what was actually here in America before Columbus. And this is shocking. When you find out this reality, it's shocking. Because when you look at the native people here today, generally, if you say to somebody native, they will think of somebody who's drunk and in a reservation and depressed, no future, really messed up. That's what you think about when you think of natives. Okay? Reality was that in the Americas, and when I use the word Americas, I mean North, Central, and South America. In the Americas before Columbus, there were over 75 million people. Now, this is something really serious. 75 million people. That means that these two continents this was one of the most populous places in the world. Because there were not billions of people in the past. It's only in the past few centuries that our population has multiplied. Over 75 million people. Historians also say that there was something like 2,000 plus different languages. They say mutually unintelligible languages. That means when somebody speaks a language to the other one, they need an interpreter. Over 2,000 languages in the Americas. Okay? Also, the people themselves, and most theories, factual theories point to the fact that somewhere between 10 to 20,000 years ago that across the Bering Straits, you know Alaska, where that is? So that side, and Russia, Siberia and Russia, you'll see there are straits that at one point in history that was frozen. So you could literally go from Russia, you could walk across. So the people came across in fairly large numbers, and they came into the Americas. And then they migrated down, some settling in the north, some moving down into what is now the United States, others going along the coastline down to Central America, down to South America. There were also people coming across from the Polynesian islands, across the Pacific, right? And landing also. So these are the two directions, but it's mainly from the northern part. And as one historian said, this is an amazing story, because when they came across at that point, 15,000 years ago or so, there were no human beings then at that point living here. So that's like you're landing on the moon, or you're landing on the planet Mars, and there's no human beings, and you now have to deal with the environment, and you have to survive. So this is an amazing story. So these people had to survive. And so the cultures were varied, but their religions were very strong. And from amongst the people, there was not only people who worshipped the sun or worshipped many gods, but there were also believers in one God. And this is based upon the fact that within our texts, that Allah Azza wa Jal has told us, وَلَقَدْ بَعَثْنَا فِي كُلِّ أُمَّةٍ رَسُولًا أَنْ يَعْبُدُوا اللَّهَ وَاجْتَنِبُوا الطَّاغُوتَ. And verily we have sent to every nation a messenger that they worship Allah and avoid false deities. We mentioned this last week. Every nation has received a messenger. So based on the text of the Quran, messengers came. Now, when you study the native culture, you'll actually see it. I found it distinctly amongst two groups. One is in Canada called the Mi'kmaq. And the Mi'kmaq nation, it's M-I-Q-M-A-Q. They were the first ones to meet the European explorers coming across, John Cabot. And these people, they live in a Newfoundland area. And amongst the Mi'kmaq, and this has recently come out in their the Elders' Council, from their writings, they have a concept called Niskam. And Niskam is the creator. They believe one God. And when you read the descriptions of Niskam, it is as though you are reading the Asma al-Husna, the beautiful names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Clear Tawheed. Also in the United States, there was a group called the Cherokee. Amongst the Cherokee nation, also clear Tawheed. A person by the name of Robert Crane. And if you look up his writings, you can Google him and go online. Robert Crane is a half Cherokee. He used to work for the government, and he brought a lot of the information out about the Cherokee nation in the United States. Clear Tawheed amongst them. And so when you look at these nations, in the northern region, which we are partially in, this is a higher part of Canada. In the northern region, the people in this region were very unique, because in the northern region, much of the year it's frozen and the ground becomes really solid. It's called tundra. And the tundra in the north, it's really tough. So they were basically hunters. They had to hunt and fish, basically for their culture. And they developed a unique survival technique in order to deal with the cold climate. And we, as Canadians and Americans living in the north, we have actually inherited a lot of their clothing. You see in your slides, you see the picture there, hoodies, right? You know your hoodies that you're wearing? Canada Goose, right? Your Canadian goose, that's from them. They were the ones that used the feathers from the goose and also the skins of the seal and different animals in order to clothe themselves and to make the first parka, or what we now call Canada Goose and hoodies. Okay, so this is actually an adaptation of the people of the north. And it's so cold up there that literally around October, everything, snow starts coming. It's really cold. Their temperatures are, much higher, much lower than ours. Their temperatures will go around minus 30 degrees, minus 40 degrees without the wind chill. It'll reach minus 50. I'm not talking wind chill. Minus 50 degrees. Okay, that's seriously cold. And you see the adaptations that they've made. They actually do ice fishing, where they dig down in the ice and they can actually catch the fish in an icy climate. It was so cold they developed with human beings having this gift from Allah of aql, intelligence. And so it was so cold outside that they use blocks of ice and how we use cement in our houses, and they used snow in between it, and they made it into a round shape. It's like what they call igloo, right? An igloo. And on the inside, you put skins of animal on the inside. You cover it completely with skin. And when you go in there and then you sweat and you breathe as human beings, it becomes so warm inside there, you can take off your shirt. That's an amazing adaptation, right? No central heating, right? No furnace. You don't pay your furnace bill, Enbridge bill every month, right? That's pure adaptation of human beings to climate. So the northern people actually made a lot of progress, and they're still struggling. Alhamdulillah, now in Inuvik on the western side, there's a masjid now. And now in Iqaluit, which is in Nunavut, we're opening up a masjid, inshallah, this summer. There's Muslims going up there, and there's a community. And the people there are basically what we call, on the eastern side, Inuit. You know the name Eskimo. You heard Eskimo? That's a bad word. Because an Eskimo means like a fish eater or a blubber eater. That's what the Europeans called them. So they don't use Eskimo. Don't call anybody an Eskimo. That's like the N word, right? It's bad. On the eastern side, they're Inuits. And on the western side, they're Gwich'in and Inuvialuit. Okay, and there's other nations. These are the three big nations. But basically, Inuit will get you across. I-N-N-U-I-T, right? Inuit people. So these are the people of the north. The next group is now the Western North America. And that is the side that goes down below Canada into the United States, all in that desert, mountainous region with big valleys in that area, like they call the Grand Canyon, and places like that. And so long, powerful rivers. Some of their nations are the Hopi, the Navajo, Siouan. These are some of the popular names. Another one is called Anasazi. Now the Anasazi people are called the Old Ones. And you see in your slide here, those dwellings there, these dwellings are cut into the side of mountains. And you'll find them in Nevada and these areas, the Anasazi people. And it looks similar. I visited Mali before, and you'll see it in Libya, in the Sahara, in the desert region. In certain parts of the Muslim world, you'll see houses like this, cut into the side of mountains. So this was a high technology that was being used, a couple thousand years ago. So these were highly technical people who actually lived in this part of the world. And they are the people of those plains and, those canyons and those areas. That's like the Western North America, okay? That's another group. Eastern North America, and this is the one we're more familiar with because that's our area there. Here you had a very rich, complex society. And here you have mountains, woodlands, Great Lakes. That's where we live. So it's our environment itself is the Eastern North American. And the people here who were Iroquois, Algonquin, Caddoan, Muskogean, Mohawk, and these nations that lived on this side, they were very industrious, and they had a really advanced society. A really advanced society. And there is a book called Lies My Teacher Told Me. That's the name of the book. Lies My Teacher Told Me. The author is called James Loewen. Loewen. James Loewen. Try to get this book. He's a University of Vermont historian professor, and he's written a different history of America. James Loewen, Loewen, Lies My Teacher Told Me. You get it online. He gives you alternative American. Another person named Howard Zinn, Z-I-N-N, has also give alternative American history. Okay? And you'll see amazing stories. One of the most popular groups amongst this side was a group called Iroquois. And the Iroquois nation, they had a confederacy. They organized, they were different, they took different major tribes and they united themselves. Ittihad. They united themselves together. A confederacy. And when the 13 colonies of America, that's what America used to be. When the 13 colonies, who were different peoples, there was Germans, British, French, Dutch. They even had an argument, a debate in the Congress, which language should be the language of America. And some people said Dutch. Some said German. They finally took English, but there was a debate. So each state had its own personality, and there was 13 of them. How can you unite yourself? They had no good example from Europe because England was fighting France, fighting Spain. They were all fighting each other. So there was not a good example of confederacy. And so they went, Benjamin Franklin, who's very famous in America, he went to the Iroquois. And he sat with the Iroquois nation, and he found that the Iroquois had made a confederacy, and their symbol was an eagle grasping 7 arrows. The eagle's holding 7 arrows. Because the concept, if you have 1 arrow, and this is science, take 1 arrow, you can break it. But if you take 7 arrows together and try to break it, it's physics. You cannot break it. You can't, it's really tough. So that's the concept of unity. And they had like what is a real democracy. People had the right, the different groups met in a type what we call Majlis Shura, and they had their leaders. Also, women had rights amongst the Iroquois. Women were called upon in leadership, and women had rights not to be abused. And even amongst the early Americans, women had no rights. Women did not have voting rights in this society till the 20th century, you know. They had no property rights and no voting rights in this society. But the Iroquois gave rights to the women. So they had a democratic type of society, and they succeeded in uniting themselves. So the Americans then took the concept, united the 13 colonies, and they made as the symbol of the United States an eagle grasping 13 arrows. Look at the dollar bill. Look at American money. You'll see the eagle grasping the 13 arrows. And they confederated. That's how Americans organized themselves. It was based on the native constitutions. It's the Iroquois Constitution. So this was a very complex society, highly organized. Probably the largest city was Cahokia. And Cahokia was what is present-day St. Louis. You know St. Louis, Missouri? It's in the Midwest. And so around 700 AD or CE, CE means AD, but around 700, they had a big city, over 100,000 people. They had 3-story houses. So they're very organized, right? They're not just a bunch of savages running around in the bush, right, and the cowboys shoot them down. You know, cowboys and Indians, right? No, it was not this. It was completely different. As a matter of fact, if you hear the early history from their point of view, it would make you shed tears. If you read this book of James Loewen, because when the Europeans came, they were like hunchbacked, and they had suffered under the plague, bubonic plague, and they were really in bad shape. The rats were carrying viruses and disease. And they came to America, and the natives were strong. They had fresh water, open lands. They hunted, they fished. They're growing crops. Corn is an American crop. It started in Mexico. Turkey, you know, your Thanksgiving dinner, it's an American bird. Tomatoes comes from here, the Americas. Corn, potatoes. Imagine what potatoes means to the world now, right? How many people know that this white potatoes originated here? Right? It's amazing how these things spread from here, but they cut it out of history, right? So because they had to justify what they did. And they came with different diseases: cholera, smallpox, influenza, measles, chickenpox. And the people here did not have the antibodies, or the systems were not prepared to fight this off. So they start getting sick fast. And they were dying. So probably 2/3 of the native people in the Americas died because of disease, not because of fighting. And then, after a while, some of the colonists even used the disease as a weapon. They would send blankets to them from people who just had measles. They would send the blankets so the people could get sick. And once they got sick, then they would die, and they put them in a ditch, and then they take over their crops. And all their crops are there: corn, potatoes, squash, cranberries. All your things in your Thanksgiving dinner is there. Right? These things are not from Europe. Okay, so this was the northern societies. Central America. Let's go down into what is now Mexico and Central America. Although Mexico, in early America, as we will see later on, Mexico stretched up all the way to Northern California. Northern California, Texas used to be Mexico. All of that territory. And the Spanish conquered, and then Americans bought the territory from the Spanish. So Central America was probably the most highly developed area. And in this area, at around 1500 BC, you have a group called Olmecs. The Olmecs had an ancient society. And there's amazing finds coming out of the Olmecs. But probably the most famous group are the Mayans. Now, you see the pyramid here in the picture? That pyramid is huge pyramids, almost the size of the ones in Egypt. These pyramids were built by the people in this society, the Mayans. And the Mayans had a calendar also that was equal to the Egyptian calendar. Remember December 12th, in 2012, everybody was afraid that the world was going to end, right? You remember that? That's the Mayan calendar. Okay? But the Mayans were not talking about the end of the world. The Mayans said it is the end of an era, a period, not the end of the world. Okay, but the point is, it was so sophisticated that it could actually predict. You could read the calendar and see world events. So these are not easy people. These were actually highly sophisticated people, right? Pyramid builders, philosophy, sciences. Then you have the Aztec nation that came later, right, who also had large cities. There was actually, in the Central America area, 25 million people lived in that area. Like Mexico City and these places were huge complexes. Here you can see that head on the here on your screen. This is was chiseled by the Olmecs, and this is a huge head. It would be the size from this side all the way to this. It's a giant thing that they found in Tres Zapotes. And if you look at the head closely, the face is an African face. There's also a ring in the ear, and they found one of them had braids in the hair. So this is not a Mexican face. And the Olmecs lived 1500 BC. So you got a problem here now. Giant African head there. So what historians have done is that they have shown that there were actually Africans way back who came across. Their sailors were probably Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were from Lebanon, Carthaginians in North Africa. They came across the Nubians, because some of the pyramids and some of the things are similar to Nubian things. That's not our thesis here. It's another thesis. and there's a scholar called Ivan van Sertima. Right? Van Sertima is S-E-R-T-I-M-A. Ivan van Sertima. He wrote a book called They Came Before Columbus. That's an important book. But he talks about the Nubians and he talks about other groups, okay, as well. Also, you can see here the calendars. That's a calendar there in your screen. Okay, so these are some of the Mayan artifacts that they have. The islands of the Caribbean itself. It's a huge archipelago of islands. And the main group are called Arawak and Caribs. These are the main two groups. They say the Caribs were more aggressive. And so they called the region Caribbean, right? The sea or the region of the Caribs. That's where the name Caribbean or Caribbean comes from. And they had high philosophy, political order. They were master seamen. But these Arawaks and Caribs were almost totally wiped out by the Europeans. And I want to show you a little journey that we took to what place called Turks and Caicos. And I went there not as the rich and famous, because this is one of the biggest tourist resorts in the world, right? It's one of the top 5 in the world, Turks and Caicos. But there's a Muslim community there. And it's like a Caribbean community. So we went to the Muslims there. We were trying to establish a masjid and a center in the Turks and the Caicos. And this is how, in this picture, that's the Turks and Caicos there. I took this picture flying in as we flew in. Okay? And the Turks and Caicos Islands, and you wonder why they call it Turks. How the Turks get into this region. When Columbus came, he found these cactus plants. See the cactus plant in the picture? Is it on there? Yeah. Do you see the cactus plant? The top of it is like a red fez. See, it looks like somebody with a fez on, right? So Columbus said they're Turks. Because the Turks wore the fez, right? Yes, well, Egyptians got it from the Turks. Because that's where the Turks conquered there. So that's why they call it Turks and Caicos. Turks were never there. But they saw these plants and they thought they looked like Turks. And this story here of the Lucayan people, you know, it's a deep story. And I want to read some of this to you so you can hear their words, not just me talking, right? These are the Lucayan people talking. And this is what it said. It says, in October 1492, when Christopher Columbus arrived in the New World, he was attempting to open up trade routes for for Spain and other European countries to expand their empires. But European history often neglects the simple fact that Europe's gain was somebody else's loss. This is them speaking now. In this case, it was the Native Americans. He said Columbus's men first believed that the Indians were subjects of the great Khan of China. Right? And so they thought it was China, India. Right? So they thought they were the subjects of the great Khan of China. The Indians believed that this group of men from the east were demons of the night forest. That's what they thought that the Spaniards were on that boat, right? They're like devils who came from a forest, from the world of the dead. And they offered gifts to make peace with them, right? So they gave them gifts. Because these people are covered with armor, conquistador warriors who've been fighting Muslims for 500 years. Right? They came for war. And so the people thought they were demons, so they offered them gifts. But the problem was that this says the gifts included small amounts of gold, the very thing that Columbus had come in search of. Okay? So there's a lot of things that go on here. But basically, you know, what happened is that he took over the islands, and it said the Lucayan Islands were emptied of their population so quickly that Spanish historians were unable to record any of the Indians' history by talking with them. Virtually all that we know of Lucayan history and society must therefore be reconstructed. They killed every single man, woman, and child. Either killed them or took them as slaves and transported them to another island. 100% genocide. Now this genocide there, according to one of their writers called Pablo Las Casas, who was a monk, a Portuguese monk. Las Casas is his name, famous person. He described the killing of the natives in the America as probably the worst genocide in history of humanity. Okay? So they killed these people on these islands about 100%. All of them. There's no trace of them left. And they conquered the other islands. All over the Caribbean, they conquered the island. Very few Caribs and Arawaks left. Can't see them at all. Because they were very humble people, not warlike people, right? They didn't want trouble. And the Spanish came with armor on. South America. In South America, there were many different languages. You have the Amazon basin. South America is a huge continent. You have mountain areas like Peru. You have coastal regions. If you go deep south in Argentina, it's like Arctic climate. It snows. So on that continent, you have all types of climates. Okay? And they had great ancient civilizations. In this picture is Peru. High in the mountains, the Inca people actually built complex buildings. So this was a highly complex civilization as well. Okay? And, South America was a huge place. And the population was, a really big population and really complex society. So this is what the Americas looked like before Columbus. Okay, this is the territory. When the Muslims now started to make their move. Okay? And we want to study what was the move that was made by Muslims to this part of the world before Columbus. How could they possibly have done this? This is the question that we want to look at. Before we close this period, because Salat is coming up, are there any questions that anybody has? Immediate questions? Anybody has about anything? Yes, sister. Mm-hmm. The compass? Right? Yeah, so there were forms of the compass in China and other places. But what the Muslims developed was the magnetic needle. The needle, the magnetic needle. That's what the difference was. There were forms of compasses that other people had. But the true magnetic needle was the development of the Muslims. And that is the one that we are using today. You have the needle that will just move, according to, magnetism. Other people had compasses that they used using the North Star and they had different ways of doing it. The Chinese had compasses. Other people had compasses as well. But the Muslim invention was the magnetic needle. Now, any other general questions anybody has? So we're going to break now for Salat. You can make your wudu. I believe the Salat is at 8 o'clock, right? Yeah, so the Adhan is going to be going off now. And we'll stop for Salat. And right after Salat, inshallah, we'll return. Wa billahi tawfiq. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.